Välkommen till universitetets aula. Welcome to the university. This message will be repeated in English. Innan dagens högtid tar sin början vill vi fästa auditoriets uppmärksamhet på några brandskyddsfrågor. Förutom de ordinarie utgångarna till trapphallen finns utrymningsvägar skyltade med grönt sken till vänster och till höger om scenen, samt från övre galleriet på var sida om scenöppningen. Vid en eventuell utrymningssituation kommer meddelande att ges via högtalarna. Vakter kommer att finnas vid utgångarna och leda utrymningen. Följ högtalarnas och vakternas anvisningar. Slutligen ber vi er kontrollera att mobiltelefonen är avstängd under ceremonin. Before today's event, please note some security routines. Apart from the main exits through the entrance hall where you came in, there are emergency exits on both sides of the podium, marked with a green light. The same applies for the gallery. In the case of an emergency, instructions will be given from the loudspeakers, and attendants will be posted at the doorways, leading the evacuation. Follow the instructions given, or simply follow your Swedish-spoken neighbors. Finally, we ask you to check that mobile phones have been switched off before the ceremony. Thank you for your attention. Tack för er uppmärksamhet.
Okay, that was an introduction to Uppsala, quickly. Welcome to the NDN conference of 2014. Very happy to be here. The localities here are amazing, really splendid. Couldn't have been a better setting. We have a couple of days now ahead of us where we will be meeting, talking, networking, sharing knowledge, hopefully creating a bit of new knowledge. Very happy and excited for that. In this opening session, we have 3 speakers. Myself, Walter Nord. I've been the chair of the program committee, and I will be making a quick introduction to this session. Ann Fust from Uppsala University has been called away for a meeting with the principal, with the rector. So I will be giving a little bit of an update on Uppsala University. And Ann Fust is coming to the opening reception in the evening today and will give a bit more of details around Uppsala. Later on we will have a speech from Maria Häll that will be presenting SUNET as well. We have René Buch from NDN that will be giving an update on the status of the Nordic collaboration and international collaboration. And we have Torben Bach Pedersen from Computer Science Aalborg University in Denmark that will be talking about big multidimensional data. And after this session, I will also give a bit of practical details about the Wi-Fi and so forth. But welcome everybody to the NDN conference. Uppsala University, quickly. Founded 1477. It's one of the oldest universities in Europe. It's also one of the biggest universities in Europe with about 41,000 students. The turnover is more than 600 million euros a year. It's highly ranked in international rankings. It's continuously listed on one of the top 100 universities in the world. So I think that the setting for this conference couldn't have been better. With those few words, I'd like to turn over to Maria. Maria, welcome.
Thank you very much, Walter. I didn't know you knew so much about Uppsala and all the details you've been studying, I hear. Anyway, I just have to say, wow, what a room. Actually, I have a few connections to Uppsala. My son is one of the 41,000 students here. And my daughter also lives here, but actually I have not been in this room. This is just fabulous. And a very great setting, I think, also to start this conference. I will start by saying very welcome to all of you, just as Walter said, but also to the many, I think, I presume, and I hope, the remote access participants that's looking at this conference, going to follow these very interesting days. This is actually the 28th time for this conference, I've been told. But for me, it's the first one. So I'm very much looking forward to hear all the amazing things and take part of and actually listen to all the discussions and the great speakers we're going to have, starting with the keynote speakers today. Actually, I guess actually they are going to touch upon this during those days, but during my 1.5 year working for SUNET, as a CEO for SUNET, I saw some great changes just during this 1.5 year. I mean, we, for instance, in SUNET, we introduced new cloud services. We are working a lot to upgrade our network and so on. I know our NDN colleagues all around Europe and all around the world, I suppose, is doing the similar thing. So these are things I think we're going to be touched upon during these days. Walter said I was going to talk about SUNET. I mean, I can stand here for a long time talk about SUNET, all the great things we've been doing together with our Nordic colleagues and also colleagues all around Europe. But I'm not going to do that now because that will take some time. It will take some time from the good keynote speakers we will have. So I will do it later in this afternoon in one of the parallel sessions together with my Nordic colleagues. By that, I would like to hand over to René, the CEO for NordNet, who will talk about a bunch of interesting things. I leave the floor to René and see you later. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Maria. Well, it's always interesting standing here. First, I would like to thank you all, both those in this room and those that are probably watching remotely, because we actually have, at least last time, quite a lot of those, and I hope we'll have that today too. It's a bit of tradition that I'm initially called this update from NordNet, and then the program committee get a bit fed up with me, and they ask me for the better title. So for that, I'm always trying to find a subject that are, how should we say, maybe just a wee bit provocative for some people. So today, I'll be talking about the missing links and obstacles to global integration. But I would first like to welcome you all to this 28th NordNet conference. This is not my first. I've been here a couple of times. It's always nice to see so many people here. But two key areas that I'm going to touch. Global network integration, have a bit of look, where do our traffic flow? Global collaboration, and what are the obstacles for the global integration seen from my seat? I'll look a bit on global service integration, which changes we see in the service delivery landscape, and what are the obstacles for global integration for services? So let's kick off. Global network integration. Actually, through the past year, through some of the discussions that we had, both in Europe and elsewhere, it made me think why we often do have challenges with discussions, for instance, with the Italians and the Germans and the British and a bunch of others. And I sat down and wrestled out some numbers from my networking people. They're always difficult to get some concise numbers on, but from seeing where we are, this is actually where our traffic flows. So, and I think that's quite interesting, because that a bit scopes a bit of the challenge that we have and from a NordNet point of view, because looking at this chart, our very good European collaboration counts for about 9% of my traffic. The next big thing is rest of Europe, which also includes our direct periods, which is Pioneer and SURFnet, but also any other institutions in Europe that are connected over our IP network in Europe. So that is actually 36% of our traffic. The interesting is also, and I think that's probably where some of the differences that we see compared to, for instance, Germany and France and Italy as an example, is that because we are rather small countries, at least from a population point of view, Many of our users do not fulfill their curiosity by local sites. So a huge amount of our traffic goes beyond our borders. It goes to Europe, and I think predominantly for a huge part of our traffic to English-speaking side, and it goes to US and the Americas for .com, .net, etc. So that poses some very different changes to what we here in NDN are doing and what we are trying to deliver to our constituency. And interestingly, up there, we also see that Asia is about 9% of our traffic. And I'm also sorry to say, when I did this graph, Middle East and Africa was not even on it. It was 0.4% of our traffic, so I upgraded them a bit just to get a bit of piece up there. But that gives a bit of an idea of where traffic flows. It also gives an idea that direct peers, which are content delivery network and content providers, is actually now a rather huge part of our connectivity. So this to give you a bit of picture of where we from NDN is challenged. And that's also the background of when people are asking us, why do you build your network like you do? And I've taken this very informative graph. Irony can occur in this sentence because this is rather complex, but I'll give you a bit of clue of, you got the big picture on the left, that must be on the right from your side, which is basically our European part or the Nordic part. You got our European sites down on the bottom, you got our North Atlantic and UK sites up there, and you got our American sites on the left. And what you actually see here is where the traffic flows. The two dark ones that are not lit right now is because we do a network migration in Europe right now. So when I took this picture, the 100 gigabit links going to these locations are in trial and not operational, which they'll be very shortly. So that gives you a pretty good idea when you're looking at this graph where our traffic flows. And looking a bit further, these are actually, and I think that's quite an interesting picture, which I've stole from the Torino Compendium, is where do we have NRENs around the globe? And that might explain why we don't have a lot of traffic into Africa, because there are still, unfortunately, some of the white spots on the face of the planet. But these are our peers, and we see that global NRENs are becoming more and more poised for working together. But when we also go to another picture and look at where is, I've stole this graph from me and Usman from Dande, looking at where is actually the capacity going in around the world. That it predominantly flows between Europe, North America, Asia, a bit to Latin America, Australia and New Zealand is connected on the side, and then we see very thin link going to Southeast Asia. We see very thin links going to Africa and Middle East. And this gives us a bit of imbalance. So what we also, and one of my fellow friends, Dave Lambert, is going to talk more about the Global NREN CO Forum later during this conference. But one of the things that we push ourselves off is that we work together. So a group of NREN CISOs have got together, and I've tried to make a representation of how they actually are. The big ones are consortiums that works together. And we've been trying to come up with a global vision of how networking could be, taking into account where do we have the large projects, where do we have large telescopes, where do we have large research instruments. And this is a graphic impression that I've stolen from another presentation, that if you go back and think of the previous presentation, this is a much more, how should we say, structured view trying to reach all the phases of the planet. And that's what we see, because a lot of the instruments, both in South America, in Africa, Australia, and even in the Nordic, and I think we are missing one vital representation from the Nordic up here, is that one of our instruments that are often used is very far up Nordic at Spitsbergen. So it gets a bit of an idea of what we are trying to connect. The initial part of this was tested out in the dotted line as a pilot, kindly called ANA100 for Advanced North Atlantic Connectivity 100. That was done by a number of partners: ESNet, Nordnet, SURFnet, Canary, Internet2 and Shard. That pilot is coming to an end and is now moving in production. And I'm using this as an example for some of the obstacles that we see later on, because this is being put in production, but unfortunately not with all the partners that we saw before. Not because of lack of ideas, not because of lack of they want to be in, but because of other things that I'm going to touch on. So what we're putting up in operation here during September, October, and November is a redundant 100 gig link, which is the first trial of the global network architecture between Europe and Washington, between these four partners. This is leading to some of my main points that I do have here today on the missing links relating to connectivity. Because why are we missing two of these partners in the picture here? I think part of this is not lack of that they don't want to be participants, but I think, to be honest, I think we are lacking a global vision for funding agencies and organizations. A lot of the funding that we see are tied into specific projects. A lot of the funding that we see are hampered by artificial connectivity policies that are definitively poisonous to cross-disciplinary thinking. One of the reasons why SUNET is not part of the consortium right now, but will function as a backup, is because the connectivity they have transatlantic is infected by an artificial connectivity policy, only allowing them to make connectivity for high-energy physics. And one of the reasons why we don't see Shant in that picture is because Europe has a problem finding out how to do some of these things, and there are different opinions in north, south, east, and west on how we do these things. So by not agreeing on that, we actually start seeing that that hampers how we can do global integration, that instead of going out purchasing things together and helping each other, we land in a situation where it will be a sub-part or single partners going out purchasing capacity, and that is not going to lead us to the picture of a global network architecture that we saw before. One of the other things that we see are regions with incumbent, non-deregulated telecommunication markets. And then people think, well, that's not a problem for Europe, and I'm sorry to say it is. Because you will still see huge differences in prices from north to south. You'll see prices in Southern Europe that are 10 times higher than you'll see on the stretches in Northern Europe or Central Europe. And even in markets that are supposed to be deregulated, there in principle are very little competition, and that drives prices up, which again puts constraints on our budgets in the sense. If you go beyond Europe, if you go to Middle East, the prices there are not based on reality, at least not my reality, that are based on various political intentions and various ideas about how people can make money, and you'll see ridiculous amount of money being paid for simple cross connects. Going further beyond into Africa and other places, of course you'll be hit by distances. There's a long way to Africa, but I'm sorry to say there's also a very, very long way to Spitsbergen, at least if you talk to our Norwegian guys that are trying to networking the part up there. And the problem is that if we are moving around in spaces where there are very little competition, you'll get very high prices, and that's going to hamper how we can do global integration. Another part, I think, that are a big stopping block, or one of the missing links that we need to get eradicated or found, is when we are subsidizing part of the planet, when we go out and say, well, it's so expensive going to A, B, and C, So we're going to throw money out of it and keep prices up. By doing that, we do support the incumbents. We do support a market that are not deregulated and where there are no competition, which basically means that if you don't have a clear strategy for changing that, then we'll keep paying high prices. We can do that for a couple of years, but there must be a strategy. How do we change that? And here we are not just talking Africa, Middle East, we are also talking certain parts of Europe. And we're even talking certain parts of the Nordics, because trying to go to Iceland, I do not dare think about the amount of money we had to pay for coming to Iceland, which is a part of and that are essential parts of Europe in that sense, but that are struck by their location and very little competition, unfortunately. So this is not just an African, South American problem. That's also a problem here in Europe and in the Nordics. And I think, to be honest, organizations do have a tendency to focus on their own internal agendas and not necessarily a global vision. I think all organizations inherently will have a tendency to think, how can we survive? How can we become bigger? How can we be sure that it's us dominated? And I think that is poisons for global integration. We need a global vision because there's no chance that we're going to get one end-run that rules them all. There's no chance that we can just think of global as one thing. The global picture will just with the countries be a patchwork of partners that are working together, and those partners need to have a global vision. And then unfortunately, I think when I started here in 2005, and I still bumped into, this has not been invented here, and therefore it's not good. I still think we see that around in the community. I think we need a lot more openness for things coming from the outside, not just on networking, but even more on services. So, going on to services. If we go back, and this is not that many years, I think this was a service model where you had a university that did a lot of the services. There were one, two, a short number of services that you would go to the inland for, and maybe a local commercial providers. So that kept things very, very closely to universities. If you at that point in time, 2005, 2006, went out to universities and think, we're going to take black, green, and red and move elsewhere, you would have been taken out and shot by the university IT staff. But this is a picture I've shown before, and this is just to illustrate, actually an updated picture, but it's just to illustrate what happens for Nordnet since 2005. The other one was the services we delivered when I joined in 2005. The one below is a patchwork that we have to deal with today. And frankly, to be honest, that is not in the long run sustainable in that sense. We need to find another model of how we help each other, realizing that there are end-runs that are very, very good at doing specific things. There are other end-runs that are very good at doing other things. We need to figure out how we do this together. So right now the model is that there will be fewer services that previously were resided at universities that are moving either to the end-run or another end-run that are very good at doing that, or even out on the global commercial providers, because I think the complexity of these services are becoming of such a degree that you have to have more knowledge, and that has a tendency to congregate things on specific knowledge platforms. This puts strains on the network, but that's also puts strains on other things, and that touches a part of what is obstacles to global integration for this part. Procurement legislation is one of them. There are very good intentions behind the EU procurement legislation of fairness, and everybody should have a chance to it. Unfortunately, especially in our network, this can be poison to how we actually is trying to deliver services to each other. We've been through an exercise to see if we could take services from our American friends or from our Australian friends. That becomes extremely complicated as soon as you put procurement legislation into that picture. And I think There are people in here that are a bit more gray-haired after spending a year or two on looking on how we can integrate procurement legislation, and probably found out that that is probably easier putting a man on Jupiter than doing that. One of the other things is knowledge threshold. By moving a lot of the services out to the cloud and to other NRENs, you move away the knowledge of some of these technologies that you're using. And I think one of the things that we have as an obstacle is how can we have the knowledge of what is needed on each part of this picture, so that the services being produced by NREN B and delivered to the universities by NREN A, that the universities and the users actually understand how to use it and actually understand what requirement there are on a local level. And some of these services are of such a degree when we are talking collaborative tools, video conferencing, video streaming, etc., the amount of people that actually have in-depth knowledge is actually rather limited. And that is an area that we need to address. I think we have an obstacles relating to delivery mechanisms for new services. That ties a bit into procurement legislation, but even if we are within the same procurement regime like in Europe, where it should actually be feasible, I actually also think that we do have obstacles for various organizations to understand and buy into that we don't need all to do everything. We must take services from places that are better probably at doing it than we are doing it ourselves, because otherwise we're duplicating efforts and that costs money. Another thing is privacy law. You would think in Europe privacy is probably a bit, how should we say, the same thing, but even in Europe there are very, very big differences what you can allow from delivering of information of individuals needed to log into services from Germany to Denmark to Sweden to Southern Europe and other places. So there we also have a challenge. I think we do see the global view being restricted by both regional or even personal agendas. I think many problems could be solved if people would look a bit further than their own backyard and thinking of how can we actually do that. Again, here also organizations are focused on their own internal agendas and not the global vision and opportunities. And also unfortunately here we do see this is not invented here mechanism. The last part I have in this one here is a thing that we just been through in NordUnet. If we just think that the NREN world and the university world can have issues relating to procurement legislation, etc., I'm afraid to say that we also stumble over commercial companies that have absolutely ridiculous corporate end-user licenses agreement and licensing regimes that make it difficult. And if anybody's in doubt, talk to Jørgen Kvist. NordUnet has just been trying to get Adobe's licensing model to fit so we can do a coherent Nordic delivery. His hair has turned significantly grayer because of that. So it's not just legislation, it's also corporate. So by this, I would think that I've been through what I intended. I would like to thank you for your attention. I do not have the time to look into some of the other things that I do think that are obstacles. Integration of AI is still not complete on a global scale. Integration with other e-infrastructure providers, and here I'm not talking networking, but a lot of other. We do have a huge global knowledge imbalance between certain NRENs, certain regions, and certain continents that we need to address. Privacy is definitively an issue, and we do see storage also being an issue. So it might sound dwarfing, that the problems are big, and those trying to solve it, at least from a comparable scale, is rather small. But I would like to finalize this with a quote from a fictitious person says, "How do you devour a whale? One bite at the time." Thank you very much for your attention, and I hope you will have a very good conference here in Uppsala. Thank you. Told that I should answer questions. I'll be happy to do so. Anybody who has questions, or will you let me off the hook? Nobody has questions. I am off the hook. Thank you.
Wow.
It seems that the mic has gone missing, and so has the session chair.
Yeah.
So now it's only the session chair that's gone missing. So I'll step in instead of him and introduce our first plenary speaker, Torben Bach Pedersen from Aalborg University, which I happen to know quite well, since at least half of the time I sit next to him. Torben has been doing research in databases for quite a number of years, both at Aalborg University, at Aarhus University, and around the globe. And I'm very much looking forward to see what he has to tell us about his work on data having several dimensions, on what you can do with all the nice data that you are able to gather these days. So it's a pleasure to welcome you. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Josva. My name is Torben Bach Pedersen, and I'm from the Center for Data-Intensive Systems at the Department of Computer Science, where Josva is an old colleague and has been for a number of years at Aalborg University, Denmark. And, well, what do I do? Well, this is what I do. I'm squeezing. I try to fit the world into cubes, not Rubik's cubes, but something called data cubes, which is also another word for multidimensional data. So the talk is going to be about aspects of that. So the agenda, well, the title is Managing Big Multidimensional Data for Energy and Beyond. So what does that mean? Well, first, I'm going to answer these questions in some steps. So first, I'm going to tell you what is multidimensional data. And then I'm going to tell you what is big data, which is sort of really a buzzword right now. If you know this Gartner group, they have this thing called the hype cycle, where technologies sort of start at the bottom and then they reach a first plateau, which is called the peak of inflated expectation in their terminology. And actually, big data is right at the top there. And from there, it goes really down, very steep, and only after that, the technologies really reach their potential and start becoming useful. So we still have some way to go. Then I'm going to talk about big multidimensional data. What is it and what's really new about it? Then we're going to look at big energy data. And here we've been doing quite a lot of work with the data management challenges of integrating large amount of renewable energy from wind, from solar and other renewable sources into the energy production, which is quite a hard task. And I'll show that this is a lot harder in Denmark than it is in Sweden. Stay tuned. Beyond is big data is not just for energy. This is for all sectors, transport, logistics, health, science, and so on. And also the really cool things happen when these sectors start to merge, when you can do things across the sectors, like what you're trying to do in smart cities and smart society research. Okay, So, multidimensional data in one slide, because I have limited time. So multidimensional data, you try and divide data into two kinds. So there's fact data. These are the events in the business you're analyzing. So that could be like a sale. When you sell something, that's a fact. And then you have dimensions, which are then the characteristics of the fact. So this could be things like time, when was it sold, product, what was sold, location, where was it sold, and so on. And then these facts, they form what's called cells in multidimensional data cubes. And you see one of these on the right. So we have here the time dimension at the bottom. So this is the year. You have a location dimension going up. And then going in is the product dimension. And then inside the cells, you have little numbers. And these are called measures. And these are quantities that can be aggregated. This could be things like the amount that you sell, it could be the price that you sell, and so on. And you can then aggregate these. And this is pretty much it. So it's very simple. And then you also have hierarchies. So you have which are different levels of granularity, different levels of detail. So for instance, you have product, you have a product type, you have product categories, you have days, months, quarters, years, and so on, but also more complex hierarchies than that. And what do you use this for? Well, you use it for stuff called OLAP, online analytical processing, which is analysis of these large amounts of data, and it has to be fast. And if you have to think about one thing, this is spreadsheets on steroids. So what can you do in a spreadsheet but just any amount of dimension, any amount of data? And you really do quite simple things with it. So the queries that you tend to ask, there are just two types. So one type of query is called a navigation query, where you basically explore the dimension. So inside this product category, what types of products do you have? What detailed products do you have below? If you have a customer dimension, you look at how they're grouped and so on. And then you have aggregation and disaggregation queries, where you basically roll up or drill down in the level of detail along the dimensions. So for instance, if we think this is too much data, there's simply too much information here, we can aggregate across the time dimension and get a more overview result, or we could drill down into one of the cells and basically explode that up so we get some more detail there. This is called drill down. And this is actually very, very classical technology. The first product of this kind came on the market in 1970, 44 years ago, so nothing new there. So what is business intelligence, which is the main application of multidimensional databases so far? Well, actually this is not very new either. So business intelligence is the ability to apprehend interrelationships of presented fact in such a way as to guide actions towards the desired goal, which is, well, doesn't say much. But what I find really interesting about it is that this term was coined in 1958. That's quite a number of years ago. But actually this has just become more and more popular, and a quite recent one proposed by Gartner last year. Now it's more like an umbrella term, so you have applications, you have infrastructures, you have tools and best practices, and that enable access to and analysis of information to improve and optimize decisions and performance. Blah, blah, blah. Okay, so it's really about optimizing your business using data, right? So certainly this is not something new. So you can show the sales by product category. You can sort of see what's the trend over time. Do I sell more? Do I sell less over time? How is it going in my different markets and so on? And how does this correlate with the different stores? Where do I have the good managers? Where do I have the bad managers? Okay, so that was business intelligence. So what about big data then? Well, where do you go to find a definition? Of course, you go to Wikipedia. So what does Wikipedia say about big data? Well, big data, it's a term for collection of data sets so large and complex that it becomes difficult to process using on-hand database management tools or traditional data processing applications. Okay, well, So actually what they say here is that big means that it's difficult to do as you usually do. So you have to do something new, something non-traditional. If you can handle it with just the regular set of tools and technologies you have, it's not big. So big, of course, can mean several things. So big data is often being characterized by, so since this is a buzzword, you have all these fancy terms, and for big data it was the V's. And originally there was 3 V's, later we get more, but basically big data is characterized by 3 V's, but it can be big data if you only have, even if you only have 1 or 2, if they're just really, really big V's. And the most obvious V is volume. So we need very large data volumes, a lot of data. Then the next V is velocity. So data has to arrive very fast. So this is data streaming in over the network, arriving many, many thousand per second of data items. And then there is variety, and I think this is probably one of the more interesting ones, because volume and velocity, these are sort of obvious, but variety is also, so this is about data that has complexity. So data has many different formats and types and meanings and so on. It can be text, it could be social network updates, it could be graphs, it could be, graphical data, scientific data, and so on. So it's not just relational data. So this is quite interesting. And then there are even more V's. So there is veracity. This is about if you can really trust the data or not, if this is just noise. Then, of course, for the data to be useful, they have to be visible for these big data processes. Then the meaning of data changes over time. In different places, the same thing means something else, and so on. This is called variability. Then some data is just not useful at all. So it has no viability, you say. And then it's all about value. So using this data, can this add some real value to our business? And often you have to use visualization to really comprehend the relationships. So these are some more V's. Okay, so we saw that business intelligence certainly was nothing new. So this thing about using data for optimization and big data is this. So what is sort of really new and what's not so new? So certainly there are a lot of similarities here. So this thing about collecting a lot of data, integrating it physically in the same database, but more importantly logically, so that things fit together and give meaning, and then analyzing all this data in order to gain some kind of knowledge. This is not new. This has been done for decades. Large data volumes, well, not new either. You've been, of course, more and more data occur, but large data volumes is not really novel either. And the thing that data arrive at a fast pace, well, people have been working on what's called data stream management for easily 2 decades. So this is not that new. But what really is new are perhaps other things. And the first type, which is actually quite different, is that for traditional BI, you had mostly structured data. So nice relational data, sales data, marketing data, and so on, with numbers and categories. Great. You knew what to do with it. In big data, you also get lots of unstructured data. So you get tweets, you get Facebook updates, you get the graphs, social network graphs, friendship graphs, and so on. And you need to make sure to get some meaning out of that. In BI, your data sources were mostly internal. So this was the company accounting system, the sales system, the CRM system, and so on. Whereas in big data, actually, a lot of the data sources are external. So think about Twitter data. Do you own that? Do you control that? No, this is external data. Facebook, shitstorms, this is external data. In BI, you cared a lot about history. So you wanted to have the full history of the customer, where did they live at what time, and so on. This was very, very important. Whereas in big data, things change very rapidly, so often the history is less relevant. Also, the people who use these technologies are quite different. So for BI, these are sort of boring people, like finance people, controllers and managers and stuff like that. Whereas for big data, we have this really cool new type of job, which is called a data scientist. So this is sort of a statistician meets computer scientist meets whatever, and this is the most cool job of the decade. Also, for BI, you really needed 4 decimal points because this was about money and so on. And in big data, I mean, you might not have all the data anyway, so you can't get an exact result. Approximation is the only thing you can get. Also, in BI, data privacy was not so critical because everything was closed, it was inside the company and so on, whereas with all the stuff spread around us on the web, privacy becomes really critical. And perhaps the most profound change is that before you had full control over the data, and now you just have no control. You know, things about your company, about your business can be out there and you have no control about it. So the change is really like this. Before we had data warehouses and analytics and so on, we're sort of sipping on a straw, and now the data is just coming right at us and we have to cope with it or die in the process. So this is what. So big data, I mean, that's many things. That's all things to all people. So what can big data be? Well, certainly the first type of big data is search data. So web pages and searches and ranking and so on. This is Google's data. And well, this is even ordinary people can use this. But this is perhaps what most people think of. Then a very prominent kind of data that is also very used a lot these days is social network data. So you have the updates from Twitter, you have them from LinkedIn and Facebook and so on, but also more internal sources like user fora are sources for these kinds of updates. And this is of course text, but it's also images, it's the user information, what are their characteristics and how are they connected in friendship graphs, what do they like, what is their location, and so on. And then there's even more advanced web data, which is called linked open data. So this is about publishing data on the web and then adding semantics to it. This is called the semantic web. I'll get back to that. So you could easily think that big data is all about web data, but it's not. And the other kind of big data is what I would call big sensor data. So we have big web data and we have big sensor data. So certainly big science data. Everyone here knows about CERN and the Large Hadron Collider and so on. This generates so much data that you can't even think about it. But there's also GPS data being collected from smartphones and GPS devices, data collected from RFID tags, and then the main focus of today is big energy data, which is the basis of the so-called smart grid. So, why big energy data? Well, the world is changing, there's a lot of challenges. There's, well, we can't perhaps feel it today, but global warming is happening, and you want to cut down on greenhouse gas emissions. Also, nuclear is controversial. Some countries have decided to phase out nuclear. And also there's the risk of energy supply security, that you might perhaps purchase energy from sort of less stable or less friendly countries, and you want to minimize your reliance on that. And one solution, certainly in Europe, but also elsewhere in the world, is more energy from renewable energy sources. So I can see Anders from Vestas here in the audience. So this is one company that bets on that. And there's all these goals. So EU has the 2020 goals. In Denmark, we have a goal in 2020 to have 50% of electricity from renewable energy. In 2035, it should be 100% of electricity and heat, and in 2050, totally renewable, no CO2 at all. So let's see if that happens. Certainly the implication is that there's a move from fossil energy to electric energy, and you are converting traditional things like driving into electricity using electric vehicles, and heat into electricity using heat pumps. And in Denmark, the expectation is that the electricity consumption will triple by 2050. Not the energy consumption, but the electricity consumption, because you move fossil to electricity. So what's the problem in that? Well, renewables are like the wind blows, more or less. So they fluctuate. And this, I mean, there's wind, which is obviously quite big up here, but there's also solar, photovoltaic, and there's some ongoing experiments with wave and tide energy. And it's really the weather conditions that determine how much energy you have. And of course, hydro, like Swedish hydro, and it's just so easy. I mean, this is peanuts. But in Denmark, we have real problems because we have to rely on wind in lack of mountains. Here are these are Greek numbers, but you see here the fluctuating production from a solar panel installation and a wind park. So it really goes up and down a lot. So the problem really is that either you have too much or you have too little energy. So these are some numbers from 2008 from the western region in Denmark. So the one on the left is the 2008 situation, and then there was at that time a projected tomorrow situation of 2025. So at that time you had 20% wind power, and the red is the demand, and the blue is wind power production. And you can see that, well, certainly the wind power production is always below the demand, and then you just top up with gas or coal plants to sort of meet the demand. However, what is interesting and happens at the right side is that often here, the blue exceeds the red. So that means that there's actually more wind power generated electricity available than the demand. So you just have too much electricity. And of course, then in 2008, you thought this is a future scenario. Actually, some recent figures from Denmark show, so in December 2013, there was a lot of wind. So 57.4% of electricity was produced by wind. And in the first half of 2014, the wind continued to blow, so it's more than 40%. So the future is actually already here today, 10 years early. So you have to do something to fix this problem. And this is where flexible demand comes to the rescue. And flexible demand is a lot of things. So let's just stay with simple domestic examples. Of course, there's also industry and commercial buildings and so on. Certainly your dishwasher, your washing machine and so on, it can run flexibly overnight or whenever you don't need it, since it only runs perhaps once or twice a day. If you have an electric vehicle, you can plug it in and then you can charge it whenever there's electricity available from renewable sources. Interestingly, you can also decharge it when there's too little available and then put the energy back on the grid and help stabilize these fluctuations. So heat pumps are also, if you have a well-insulated house, heat pumps can operate quite flexibly and sort of spend some electricity and then not work for a couple of hours and then switch back on. And if we take this tripled electricity consumption into account, actually up to 80 to 85% of the future demand, not the current demand, but the future demand is flexible. So this is good, this is good. This is going to save us. So, big energy data, what is that? Well, so you remember the 3 V's, right? There was variety, volume, velocity, and so on. So let's start with variety. And big energy data is complex data of many different types. So certainly one type of energy data is consumption data. You have data collected from smart meters, so electricity meters that are network enabled. But you also start collecting data down to the socket and the appliance level. You also have production data from wind, from solar, from power plants, and so on. And then there's an interesting new kind of data, which we have worked with a lot, which is flexibility data. So when you have the demand and the supply, what part of it is flexible and how flexible is it? And this is really the key to make this puzzle work. And then, of course, there's data about prices and weather and so on. There's a lot of this data, perhaps not today, but tomorrow, because the smart meters are only being rolled out to consumers right now. But if we make a simple calculation, if we want to measure the consumption for every prosumer, so every consumer or producer of energy in Europe, every second, that's more than 20 trillion values a day. So that's 20 times 10 to the 12th per day. And then we could actually go even lower. We could go and look at the consumption not at the household level, but at the appliance level. How much does the dishwasher use? How much does the EV use? And so on. And then we have all the other data types. So certainly there's enough data. And it comes really fast. I mean, we need to read this at very high velocity in order to actually see the real variations in data and not average over long time periods. And also what you see a lot in this energy field is that often the data is so fast that it hasn't even happened yet. So what you do is that you forecast everything, and then you do a long-term forecast, then you reforecast at the medium level, at the short level, and so on. And at the time that you actually get to measure how much you actually spend, then you forecasted things 3 or 4 times. And you actually want to query across the future and history. We'll see a little bit about that later. In this talk, we will focus on variety and velocity. So variety is this flexibility data. That's one example of that. So consumers, these are of course households, but also enterprises, small enterprises, big enterprises, and so on, organizations, they have some demand which is flexible and is also schedulable. So that means that we can actually tell the appliance when to use the energy. This could be dishwashers or washing machines, it could be EVs or heat pumps, it could be various kinds of production equipment and so on. And what we have done in a project called Mirabel that I'm going to tell you about is to basically make this explicit. So we have this concept of a flex offer where we capture the flexibility explicitly and we have flexibility in time. So we have here a profile, so this could be about running a dishwasher. So in the beginning we spend some energy heating up the water, and then we have the various cycles. So this is a 2-hour profile, and at any time we can sort of use a little more, a little less, because we can postpone or do something a little bit earlier. And then this takes about 2 hours, but we can sort of move it, right? So it doesn't, if we load the dishwasher then and press a button, then it just has to be ready by 7 a.m. when I need the dishes again. So it can run basically all night. So we have a flexibility in time, and sometimes we also have a flexibility in energy. So these are the little bit darker brown areas that you see where you at any point in time can turn up or turn down the amount a little bit. And then there's also flexibility in price. So we have a multidimensional flexibility available. So let's look at a use case here. So we are going to charge our electric vehicle. So we arrive home, perhaps rather late at 10 at night. We want to recharge, so it's available in the morning, and we have to leave pretty early, so it has to be charged at 6. And then we plug it in, then automatically by magic, a flex offer is generated, which specifies that this is the energy we need. So we need at least this many kilowatt hours to have our battery charged a reasonable amount. And then, based on the weather forecast and the available renewable energy, the energy trader that we buy our energy from decides, well, actually it's best to charge the EV at 3 a.m. And so we basically tell it, well, you can do it any time between 10 p.m. and as long as it's finished by 6. You decide. So we basically pre-order some energy, and we don't decide ourselves. We hand over the right to decide when it's going to be executed. And then they decide, well, this should happen at 3 a.m. And then if we have an event where there's more wind at 2 a.m. and we have a surplus there, then we can move it a little bit earlier, or we can delay it if we have the opposite problem. And we can use this for several things. So we can, for instance, use it for balancing. So we have flexibility here. And what we see here at the bottom is, if we have demand, the yellow part is sort of the non-schedulable demand. This is like cooking, lighting, and so on. And then we have the flexible, and we have the supply at the top. And then we need to basically balance out. So this is more like, perhaps like a nuclear power scenario where we want a relatively flat consumption. And we can reduce the peak consumption. And we can do this by then putting the Lego bricks so that we have a relatively smooth profile. Another use case is the higher rate of renewables, where basically we have the supply, so the gray is past fossil electricity, and the green is renewable electricity. And then, of course, we want to match this supply profile with the energy profile, and then we move the flex offers into these tips so that we can match this profile. So this is another way of using it. And how do we do this? Well, I mean, we have, obviously, there's a lot of these few little, these small items with a few kilowatt hours, and we can't really fiddle around with all those. So what we do is that we have millions, many millions of what we call microflex offers. Then we aggregate those into, we take all the small Lego bricks, aggregate them into large Lego bricks, and then we take the large Lego bricks and then fit them so that they fit with the forecasts for when do we have available renewable energy. Are there other kinds of constraints like grid constraints so that we can't actually spend this much energy in that part because there's not sufficient grid bandwidth to actually move the energy. We have to make it fit with price and price negotiation and so on. This is called scheduling. And then we have assigned, okay, now the big Lego brick is here, then we have to explode it back out. This is called disaggregation, so we basically have to take it apart again and then take all the little units and assign, okay, you run here, you run here, you run here, and then the whole puzzle is solved. So this is what we do. And, well, there's a lot of algorithms involved in this. One is about flex offer aggregation, where we take a large set of input flex offers and aggregate them into a smaller set of output flex offers. And then disaggregation is then the opposite. So after we've done this macro level scheduling, we have to disaggregate and basically explode the macro flex offers out again. And here, of course, no matter how we do the macro level scheduling, it has to be always possible to correctly disaggregate. So we have to still respect all these individual constraints that the EV has to be finished at 6 a.m. and it has to get this much energy and so on. We can't forget that in the big picture. We also, when we do the aggregation, we want the number of aggregated flex offers to be as small as possible. This makes it easier to do the scheduling, which is an NP-complete problem. But also what happens is that often when you aggregate, you actually lose some of the flexibility, because if you have two small ones, you can sort of move them independently. When you aggregate, you have to move them together, which means that you can lose some flexibility. So there's various heuristics for how to preserve the flexibility as much as possible. Also, we have timing constraints. We have to do aggregation, scheduling, disaggregation within some rather limited time period, like 10 minutes. And the way we actually do it is that we have all the input flex offers. This is what you see on the left. Then we try and group them so that they, in each, so it's like a clustering process. You want to group them so that the ones in the same group have similar characteristics. This is one way of preserving flexibility. And then when you have these groups, then you basically need to bin pack them so that you get aggregate flex offers that fulfill certain aggregate constraints. And then you have a result. And then some of them actually might not fit anywhere, so they're sort of left out for perhaps for reprocessing when a better fit comes along. Then also in this system, forecasting is essential. And this is really a lot of work. This was mostly done by our project partners at TU Dresden. But there's a lot of issues here. One is that you have to create these forecast models, you have to use them, and you have to maintain them all the time when there's new data, when the weather forecast changes, when the demand changes, and so on. And you have to support a lot of different models with single or multiple equations. You have to account for weather and other external data. You also try to forecast the demand, you try to forecast the supply, but you also try to forecast actually the flex offers, the flexibility. And this is in a continuous iterative cycle where you have evaluation, how well does it work, and then you maintain and do it all over. Then scheduling is about that you have these aggregated flex offers, and then you have to fix when do they start, what are the energy demands, and so on. And here you use the forecasted energy production and consumption, and also things like market pricing. And then basically you have an evaluation function. I'm not going to go through that in detail, but this is the actual evaluation function that we have to minimize, and this is related to the cost of imbalances in the energy market. So it's a rather complex formula, as you can see. And actually, what turns out is that finding the optimal solution is really prohibitive. It's, takes too long time, so we use approximate methods. So how does all this fit together? Well, we have a mirrorball database where we have various kinds of data. So there's measurement data and there's flex offer data. So the flex offers are aggregated, and the measurement data, both for demand and supply, are used for forecasting. Then we get aggregated flex offers, we get forecast, and this then goes into the scheduling process, followed by the disaggregation process. And then we send it out to the prosumers, consumers and producers. And we have some time constraints, like 10 minutes to do all the scheduling, and then we have 5 minutes to distribute it to all the partners. And how does this look in a distributed setting? Well, the system, which is eventually going to be out there in the smart grid, is one which reflects the energy market. In the energy market, there is a European standard called the harmonized role model, which is about how you organize a liberalized energy market. And at the bottom, you have consumers and producers, nicknamed prosumers. So these can be sort of households with a little solar panel, which is actually both consuming and producing energy. It can be plants, it can be wind turbines, it can be large power plants, and so on. And if you look globally, we are talking billions of units here. Then they are buying their energy through traders, which are, depending on what area you're looking at, these are hundreds and thousands. So in Denmark, there's a couple of hundred traders, and we have 3 million households. And then at the top, you have what's called transmission system operators. So these are the ones operating the backbone network, so the really big power cables doing power exchange across countries and between countries. So in Denmark, we have one of these. In bigger countries like Germany, there's 4. So this is how it looks in a distributed setting. And, well, actually this works. This is, I don't think I have time to show the video today, but we can basically show what happens. So at the bottom you have the demand, and at the top you have the supply, and then what happens over time, the forecast change. So the wind blows a little bit more, so you have more supply and so on. And actually what we can show happening is that then the demand, if you have enough flexibility available, the demand will adapt, and the peaks will sort of match each other on both sides. So we can take that in the break. So the experimental results that we have, these are, I have to say, based on simulations, since we don't have such a system out running in the world yet, is that balance responsible parties, so these are the energy traders, they can reduce their cost by 7 to 13%. We can reduce the peak load by up to 50%, depending on how much flexibility. We can increase the base load, so we can basically make the load more smooth. And we can improve RES integration significantly. So if we have just 15% of the energy consumption is flexible, we can neutralize 70% of the negative impact of the fluctuations. And of course, as I said, this percentage might be much higher in the future. We can reduce the energy bills of households, and if we add energy storage, we can also reduce CO2 a lot. One other result is that actually, instead of trying to schedule all these little units themselves, it works much better to first aggregate and then schedule. This is certainly much faster, but actually, because of the timing issues, this also gives you better results. So basically, in the same time, you can find a better fit. And if you have less conservative flexibility assumptions, like 50 or 60 or 70% flexible, of course, you can do much more. Okay, so this was about variety. So now, let's switch to velocity, which is about what you call fast energy data. So you have all these time series, you have supply, you have demand, you have flexibility, and so on. And as I said, well, when data is born, it hasn't even happened yet. So it starts out in the future. So you do a long-term forecast, perhaps even months into the time. This is done a lot for prices and so on. And then when you get a little bit closer, you start doing supply forecasts and so on. And then you do medium-term forecasts, which are more accurate. You do short-term forecasts. You get into the actual day. You still do forecast. And of course, the forecast gets better and better because you know more and more. You know how the weather is. You know something about the demand and so on. You know how cold it is. So it gets more and more accurate. And finally, after all this forecasting, data sort of makes it to the present. So the energy is actually consumed, and you can actually measure it. So you can measure it off the sensor or the smart meter. There might be a little bit of inaccuracy here. There might be a little bit of delay. And then after the present, it makes it into the past because you want to keep this data for analytics, doing all kinds of analysis, but also very importantly, you need it for reforecasting what will happen tomorrow. And actually, if you look at this whole thing, one observation is that really the only difference between the future and the past is sort of, predicted data and real data. The main difference is the level of accuracy. So for real data, you sort of have very, very good accuracy. For predicted data, you have less accuracy. So why couldn't we use this? And this is one thing we also try to do is you have these better and better models. Why don't we use them to represent all data? So not just the future data, but also the past data. And then instead of loading the data, we just have, we have these really good forecasts. Perhaps we just have to tune the parameters a little bit. And then we actually have a very good model of the past data. So this might be more or less free. So this is what we try to do in a system called time travel. So this is about that you have the past data, you have the future data, and then you can sort of have queries that cut across the past and the future. So, let's see what's the average consumption for today and tomorrow. And of course, there's two kinds of queries available. So one is exact queries, where you say, well, let's see the average consumption for today and tomorrow, where we actually use the real detailed time series values. And of course, the future values or forecasts are not quite exact. But we can also do approximate queries where we give an absolute or a relative error. So we say, well, within 5 or 10%, that's okay. This is within the forecasting inaccuracy anyway, so let's just allow that. So show the average consumption for today and tomorrow with up to 5% error. And this really gives a potential for very large performance gains. And the system we built, we have a hierarchical model index, so we have sort of a pretty crude model covering a lot of time, and then sort of for different subsets of the time series, we have more and more accurate models in sort of a tree, and then the further we get down to shorter and shorter time periods, the more accurate models we have. And at the bottom, actually, we can have the actual data values. So this is sort of one very detailed model, which of course takes up a lot of storage. And we have less and less error. What we do is that we take the actual time series and we split it into 3 components. So one is what's called seasonal variation. Another is the trend, so it's sort of, are you using more or less over time? And then the residual there is then the error. And by capturing these 3 independently, you can actually do something, get less error. We have a prototype based on PostgreSQL, and basically the short thing is that the idea works. We can get up to 2 orders of magnitude smaller data storage and also faster query performance. So we can do this all based on SQL. So let's look at some examples. So if we have the 15-minute power consumption for yesterday with a max error of 100, this looks like this. The time is given in these square brackets. So we can say that the interval is 15 minutes. We want from minus 96 time units to 0, so that's up to now, and we allow an error of 100. So that looks like that. So this is a past query, but it's approximate. We can also do a time travel query where we travel into the future and find the daily maximum power consumption over the last and next week. So this is the max power consumption from this data set going 336 time units into the past and similarly 336 into the future. And the results are then like this, and the blue is the result, and this reddish color is the actual data. So the error is actually quite small. The architecture looks something like this. So we have a model for actually building the time series, which takes both time series but also hints about what kind of seasonality do you have and so on, and this is used for building a hierarchical model index. Then we have a compression module that takes similar models and tries to combine them in order to get compression. Then this is all about building the models. Then, of course, we have to use them for querying. So we have a query processing model which extends the PostgreSQL query processor and optimizer and basically does these approximate queries for range queries, point queries, aggregates, and joins. And what it does is that it basically traverses down the model index until you find a model that has a good enough accuracy for what you need. So you sort of start from the top, and when you reach the accuracy you need, you stop, and thus you don't access all the data. We also have a forecasting module for predicting the time series values, doing estimates on the error and confidences, and doing re-estimation. And a maintenance model. When you get new values, you need to maintain the forecasts, and so on. Okay, so this was all about big energy data. So could I ask just one question? Oh, yeah, because actually on the screen it says 10:21, but on my watch it says 10:15. So good, yeah. Okay, so this was big energy data. But of course, as I promised, there was also a beyond, so other kinds of big data. So one project we do is about what you call big RFID data. So I assume you all know RFID tags. So here you can see at the back of the baggage strip there. So an RFID tag is basically a tiny, tiny chip and a little bit bigger antenna, which can be printed. So this is actually a real baggage tag where you put the RFID inside the tag itself. This already happens out of Aalborg on all bags. So we have a project called Backtrack, styr på bagagen. So most of the Swedes should understand that certainly. So this is a project between our group, Lyngsø Systems, SAS, IATA, the International Airline Association, and Aalborg Airport. And this is about putting RFID in the baggage tags and then also putting up readers so that you can read them. And actually, there are readers right here in Arlanda. So, and we have an app where you can basically get the latest readings, and you can see where the hell is my bag, where was it last seen. So, this, and you put a little bit of information on this. And of course, the smart thing about RFID is that you get much higher read rates. Even with state-of-the-art barcode scanners, you can only read about 90% because sometimes the tag is underneath the suitcase, sometimes it's curled or bent or whatever. With RFID, you get to 99 point whatever. So you have a lot more data, and you have sort of an ID. This is called a license plate, and then there's a little bit of information about the route and the date. So you can put about 150 bytes on the chip. And what we're trying to build in this project, well, mostly the industrial partners, is that in 2020 we want real-world time, worldwide baggage tracking and information, and this should reduce the baggage problems by 50%, and this will save the industry $1.2 billion a year. So yeah, that's all very useful. The funny stuff is, of course, what we do. And there's a lot of things, so certainly these RFID, you get a lot of reads, but often you get too many reads because you also get the reads from the next conveyor belt because it's too close. So you have to do a lot of data cleansing to actually get the true meaning out of it. So model the airports and the movement and so on, figure out what's the reality and what's not. Then we have to process in real time and actually also into the future. So one thing we're trying to do is to sort of predict traffic jams in the baggage sortation. So predict how many bags are going to be at the sortation system in 10 minutes from now. We do analysis of the processes and the measurements using technologies like OLAP. We do data mining, which is about looking at these event sequences and trying to see when did it make the plane, when did it not make the plane. Can we find some kind of a pattern in what it was that made it not miss the plane? And we have data potentially for more than 1,000 airports, and there's certainly a lot of it. Also, another kind of big data is what you could call linked open data. This is the linked open data cloud from April 2014. So this is from, so in the middle you have DBpedia, which is basically Wikipedia for data. And the linked open data cloud is about basically taking the data that people put out there on the web, and they put meaning on them, semantics, using semantic web technology, something called ontologies, which is like UML diagrams on steroids. And actually, we are very proud because we made some work with taking some government data about businesses from Denmark and taking some agricultural data about farms and organic farms and so on, and put that data set out there. So we got our own little point in the data cloud in the government sector. And what can you use this for? Well, if you want to do business intelligence on big linked and open data, it's all about bringing in external data. So you have your own data, you know what they mean. After 20 years of data warehousing and data cleansing, you know what your own data means, but what about the data you bring in from the outside? And having comma-separated files that you can download is not really enough. You need to know what is the format, what is the meaning, and so on, and how do you query it, how do you access it? And certainly one proposed solution is what's called the semantic web, where you have ontologies, which is like data models, super data models that can state the meaning, and then also you try and link to other data sets, and you have things like, okay, this is the definition of a social security number in Denmark or Sweden. You can point to it and say, that attributes mean exactly that. This is a price including Swedish VAT and so on. You can point to that and so on. And then the idea is that this is all connected, and you can ask queries in a query language called Sparkle. And one of the things we're working on is how can you enable what we call self-service business intelligence. So this is basically, you have a problem, you might have some of the data that you need to answer the solution, but you don't have everything, and then you need to find the missing data out there. Perhaps hopefully in the linked open data cloud, you can find something that can match your need, and then you can bring that in, integrate it with what you have, and answer your question. So, this brings me to the summary. 5 minutes, okay, great, because I have some more slides. But let's summarize. Well, actually, in that case, I'll go, yeah. So I hope the slides are being put up so that you can see there's some references here to the projects and various papers and so on. Let's not go through those now. But I'll tell you a bit more about some ongoing projects. One of them is our information technologies for IC technologies for business intelligence doctoral college, which is an Erasmus Mundus joint doctorate, where we do joint PhD degrees between two universities. We have Aalborg University, Technical University of Dresden, Free University of Brussels, Technical University of Barcelona, and Technical University of Poznan in Poland. And we have a lot of industrial partners, Microsoft Research and HP Lab and Oracle and SAP and what have you. And if there are some smart young people, well, or not so young people in the audience that would like to work on big data technologies, the application for next year's term starts October 1st at this address. So if you want to work on big data analytics or other big data items, you should come and work with us. So please apply. Also, we have some ongoing, so what I told you was about the Mirabel project. We have two ongoing projects. One is called TotalFlex. TotalFlex vision is, so this is a purely Danish project where we want to develop a market-based and cost-effective systems where we can utilize the total flexibility in energy demand and production, where we also take balancing and grid constraints into account. And here we do some quite funny things. So one thing is that we have a home automation company there where they have intelligent sockets. So these are basically wireless sockets that where you can measure by the milliwatt by the millisecond. And then so you can really measure how much is the fridge using, how much is the dishwasher using, and so on, and the TV and whatever. And we can collect all this data. And what we want to do with it is that we want to predict energy consumption and flexibility, not at the household level, but at the device level. So we want to go down to those actual devices and try and learn the behavior of people and use that to actually auto-generate these flex offers. Then we also try and model heat pumps and other kinds of flexible demand as flex offers and do more advanced aggregation and analysis. And then, so there's we go into the household and try to reach down to the device level, and then we also go out on the grid level and try to help what's called the distribution system operators and transmission system operators, so the parties operating the low voltage and high voltage grids so that they can avoid congestion. So for instance, when you get all these EVs, it's actually going to be a problem to charge them because they're going to blow the fuses, not of the household, but at the transformer at the end of the street. If they all switch on at the same time, it's going to blow the fuses. Another project is called Arrowhead. This is actually what became the largest FP7 project in all. This is about collaborative information, so systems and people and so on work together to optimize goals. And here the flex offers are the basis for Work Package 5, Virtual Market of Energy, where we want to demonstrate that you can actually use this flexibility for energy optimization in residential buildings, in commercial buildings, in industrial processes and production, and in electromobility like EVs, using a service-oriented architecture. Also, big transport data is something that this is mostly my colleagues that do this. So collecting GPS data and using this to understand and measure environmental impact, and they then assign time-varying eco-weights to the road segments. How many? 1 minute, okay. And do cool things like finding the most fuel-efficient route and so on. Let me then summarize here. So, multidimensional data. This was the stuff about facts, dimension, measures. There was the hierarchies. You could go up or down. You can aggregate, you can disaggregate, and so on. Big data, volume, velocity, variety, but there were also all the other V's. So these were all these characteristics that sort of made it hard, that made it novel. Big multidimensional data, some of the things were not so novel, but actually there's some things which are novel. And we see these occurring in several domains. So certainly in big energy data, we have flexible demand that must meet renewable supply. We have all these time series that we forecast. We have flex offers, which is about generalizing and making energy flexibilities explicit. We have this fast data where you can query even into the future. And we have high variety and velocity, and the high volume is certainly coming in the upcoming years. Then there were all the other kinds of big sensor data, RFID, GPS, and so on. There was the linked open data, the social networks. And the bottom line here is job security. So because all this data also needs to be moved, right? So we need to ship it all back and forth. So if you're sort of in the data business or the network business, I think we're pretty safe. So I'll finish off with that. And then thank the organizers for inviting me.
So I'm sorry for breaking you a bit short, but I wanted to see if there's a time for a few questions from the audience before we take some practical details.
Yeah.
Oh. Okay, now it works. Thank you. Thank you very much for a very interesting speech, and I also appreciate very much that you gave some practical examples so you can get a connection to the day-to-day life, so that I very much appreciate it. But of course it came into my mind during your speech, and actually you mentioned network in the last bottom line.
Yeah.
Because I wanted to draw the connection to our National Research and Educational Network, how is this technology, this use of all this big data and other things you've been talking about, how could you take advantage of our networks? And also computing capacity in our networks, the identity services, and all these things. So I would like you to give a few examples.
Yes.
There. Thank you.
Well, this is obviously a very relevant question in this forum. And of course, I'm not a networking person. And in these projects, we've really taken network connectivity more or less for granted, not because it's easy, but because we had to make the cut somehow. Let me go back to this slide here, where basically, so one answer is that there are all these players. So there's really hundreds of millions of players that needs to be connected and in various ways, and there's a lot of data actually flowing back and forth. So there's certainly a lot of need for connectivity. Also, of course, as you said, privacy is very important, because if you go down here, actually your energy consumption is sensitive, because this tells people when are you at home, when are you not at home, and so on. Actually, by looking at the energy signal, there are these German researchers that could figure out, they looked at the energy signal from the TV, they could figure out which movie you're watching. So it's really quite sensitive if you make it detailed enough. And of course, so the security aspect and the privacy aspect is very, very big. This is not something we work with so far, but that's certainly very essential, yes. And, well, I mean, what I talked here about a lot is sort of the energy grid, but of course, to make it the smart grid, you have a communication structure on top, a communication infrastructure overlaid on it, which is all about exchanging information. And this is, certainly you need a lot of stability there, you need very low latency and so on. And another answer is the big science data, but of course you know more about this than I, that you have all these big machines generating, like the new facility in Lund, where the data analysis is actually in Copenhagen and so on, so you need to transfer all this data back and forth. But yeah, networking is important, but I don't know much about it, so. Yeah.
Thank you for an excellent talk. I have one more question for you. This is regarding the time series thing which you talked about in the big energy thing. Network also collects a lot of time series data, and you did a lot of time series analysis, moving averages and stuff. Is there any packages that you are putting out, making available, that we can use and leverage to analyze network time series data, or is that some commercial package that you use, or do you have any input into that?
Well, actually, why don't you give me your card? Because I'm going to give a related talk in Dresden on Thursday with my German colleagues. They're the ones who've been doing all the forecasting. They certainly did a lot of things. They haven't put it out as open source yet, and I'm not quite sure what their exact plans are. The project was coordinated by SAP, this Mirabel project. And that's a little bit different. When you have one of these big commercial companies sort of coordinating a project, the sort of things happen in a little bit different way. It's not, you don't put out everything as open source right away and so on. I think we're going to do that much more in some of these follow-up projects. That being said, you also have to be, domain knowledge is just essential. So network time series is very, very different from energy time series. And this is what you appreciate more and more, that there's no sort of one size fits all. But certainly there are technologies coming out that can help you do that, both from the research side. Also SAP actually have, as a result of this project, made a sort of a forecast component, whatever you can call for SAP HANA, that can help you choose the right models and do the forecasts and so on. So, yes.
Okay, I will have to cut questions short. We have a coffee break coming up, and I'm sure you will be around taking questions. I've got a couple of questions myself, but I'll take them in the coffee break later on. Once again, thank you very much.
And you had your practical announcements.
I will also take a quick break on some practical questions before we go for a coffee break. All the coffee breaks, lunch, etc. will be outside here in the main hall. The opening reception in the evening today will be on the first floor on the other side, also in this building. The dinner today in the evening there is no common dinner, so please go out, discover what Uppsala has to offer in the evening. So there's no organized dinner today. For the gala dinner tomorrow, there are buses leaving for those that wish to book a bus. And the buses are leaving from the Clarion and the Scandic Hotel inside the city, and also from this venue. From the hotel, the bus goes 19:10, and from this venue, 19:20. So if you want to book a bus, please go past by the reception during the coffee break now and get a seat. Otherwise, it's a 10-15 minute walk. It's in Uppsala Castle, so it's close by to walk also. Once again, very happy to see that we all, during this session, managed to keep our mobiles switched off. There was no interruption. Very happy to see that. I also would like to remind all of us that are speaking that there are a lot of people listening into this through the streams. And for the streams to function, we need to have the presentations uploaded. So, a reminder for all of us that are speakers, please upload your presentations. This room has been a little bit of an echo, and in the next session after lunch, when we will have the lightning talks here, we will close the curtains, so it will be a little bit smaller room. So if you are having things, please sort of move forward. For those that needs to print stuff, talk to the registration desk. They have printers and things there, boarding passes, etc. And a quick reminder that there are 3 tracks during the rest of this conference, and there are track 1 that is in hall 1 on this floor, track 2 that is in hall 2, that is, if I remember correctly, on that side, and track 3 that is on hall 9 on the first floor. I think that were all the practical details, so please enjoy the rest of the conference and let's go for a coffee break.